I believed my wedding day would unite my family. Instead, it quietly broke my heart forever. Before this story begins, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted the people closest to you, only to realize they were hiding the deepest betrayal? If that question touched your heart, gently press the like button, subscribe to this channel, and take a deep breath with me. This is not a loud story, it is a quiet one, and it stayed with me long after the wedding ended. My name is Claire. I have always been the quiet one, the one who listens more than she speaks, the one who believes love can fix almost anything. I believed marriage was a promise of safety. I believed family meant loyalty. And on the morning of my wedding, I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. I had no idea that within hours everything I trusted would fall apart. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with a silence so heavy it changed who I am forever. I grew up believing that family was the safest place in the world. Not perfect, but safe. The kind of place where you could rest your heart without fear. That belief followed me into adulthood, into love, and into the choices I made. I was raised in a small town where everyone knew each other's names and stories. My parents worked hard, loved deeply, and taught us that honesty mattered more than pride. When they passed away earlier than anyone expected, my brother Daniel became my protector without ever saying so. He didn't replace them, but he stood steady so I wouldn't fall apart. Daniel was 4 years older than me, quiet, observant, and strong in a calm way. He never spoke much, but when he did, people listened. I trusted him more than anyone in the world. When he married Emily, I was happy for him. She seemed warm and thoughtful at first, always bringing food, always offering help, always smiling just a little longer than needed. People said Daniel was lucky, and I agreed. Years later, when I met Mark, my future husband, it felt like my life was finally settling into place. Mark was gentle. He listened when I spoke. He never raised his voice. He said I made him feel calm, and I liked being that for someone. Our relationship grew slowly. No rush, no fireworks, just comfort. I believed that kind of love lasted longer. Mark fit easily into my family. He admired Daniel. He joked with Emily. The four of us shared dinners, holidays, long talks late into the night. From the outside, we looked like a picture of balance and trust. I didn't notice how often Emily and Mark sat next to each other. I didn't question why she knew his schedule so well. I didn't wonder why he sometimes seemed distracted after family gatherings. I told myself it was nothing, because when life feels stable, you don't look for cracks. You assume the ground beneath you is solid. You assume love means loyalty, and you assume the people who smile at you would never be the ones to hurt you. As the wedding approached, everything felt calm. No drama, no doubts. Just plans, lists, and quiet excitement. I thought I was stepping into a new chapter of peace. I didn't know I was walking toward the moment that would force me to see everyone clearly for the first time. At first, nothing felt wrong enough to name. It was just small moments that passed too quickly to hold on to. Moments I brushed aside because they didn't fit the life I believed I was living. I told myself that peace meant not questioning everything. Emily laughed at Mark's jokes a little longer than everyone else did. When he spoke, she looked at him instead of the person he was talking to. I noticed it, but I told myself she was just being friendly. She was my sister-in-law. That word alone made me feel foolish for even thinking twice. Sometimes Mark would come home quieter than usual after family dinners. He would say he was tired, or that work had been heavy that day. I didn't push. I believed love meant giving space. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but the kitchen light was on. Emily was standing there scrolling through her phone, as if she belonged there. She smiled quickly when she saw me. "Oh, I was just helping Mark plan something for you," she said. Her voice was light, almost rehearsed. I remember smiling back even though something in my chest tightened. I told her thank you. After that night, little things began to add up. Mark started canceling plans at the last minute. He would say Daniel needed help with something, but when I mentioned it to my brother later, he looked confused and said Mark never came by. I laughed it off in front of him. I didn't want to sound suspicious. I didn't want to be that person. Late at night, Mark sometimes rolled away from me in bed. He said he couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, telling myself not to imagine stories that weren't real. I told myself trust was a choice. Emily began texting me more often, asking how wedding plans were going, offering help with decorations, seating, flowers. Her messages were always kind, almost too kind. There were moments when our eyes met across the room and she looked away quickly, moments when Mark stopped talking the second I entered a space. Each time my heart whispered that something wasn't right, and each time I told it to be quiet, because admitting doubt would mean admitting fear, and fear would mean everything I believed in might not be true. So I stayed silent, I stayed hopeful, I stayed blind, and without knowing it, I was walking closer to the moment that would change my life forever. The morning of my wedding arrived quietly, no rush, no noise, just soft light slipping through the curtains and the steady sound of rain tapping against the window. It felt gentle, like the world was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, wearing a simple robe, my hands resting in my lap. The room smelled like clean linen and old memories. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was exactly as it should be. Mark had left me a letter the night before. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to crease the paper. It said he loved me. It said he chose me. It promised forever. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. I wanted to carry that feeling with me down the aisle. At the venue, people moved softly, as if afraid to disturb the calm. Flowers lined the tables, white and pale green. Everything looked peaceful. Emily helped me into my dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the zipper up. I thought she was nervous for me. I thanked her for being there. She hugged me longer than expected. Her arms felt tight around my shoulders. I remember thinking she was holding on like she didn't want to let go. An hour before the ceremony, I realized I hadn't seen Mark. I wanted to find him, not for tradition, just for reassurance. I walked down a quiet hallway near the storage rooms. The noise from the main hall faded with every step. That's when I heard voices, low, close, too familiar. I stopped walking. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I can't keep pretending after today," Mark answered softly. "We just have to get through this." There was a pause, the kind that stretches too long. Then I heard it, a kiss. My body went cold, not shaky, not loud, just still. I opened the door. They stood there, too close, eyes wide. Emily gasped. Mark stepped back like he had been burned. "I can explain," he said, but there was nothing left to explain. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions. I turned around and walked away, carrying a silence that felt heavier than any scream. I don't remember how I walked away. I only remember the sound of my own breathing, slow and uneven, like I was trying not to disappear. The hallway felt longer than before, every step chewed inside my chest. I found Daniel outside the venue, standing near the trees where the rain couldn't quite reach him. He looked calm, like always. When he saw my face, his eyes softened, but he didn't ask questions right away. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then I told him everything. My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how steady it was. I told him about the voices, the words, the kiss. I told him how empty I felt. Daniel listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low when he finally spoke. "Are you sure?" he asked, not because he doubted me, but because he needed to hear it. I nodded, once, slowly. He looked toward the building then, back at me. For a moment, I thought he would be angry. I thought he would storm inside and tear everything apart. Instead, he said something I never expected. "Go through with the wedding." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "What?" I whispered. "Let them think they've won," he said quietly. "Trust me." My heart pounded. Every part of me wanted to run, to scream, to cancel everything, but Daniel's eyes were steady, protective, certain. I didn't understand his plan. I didn't know what would come next. All I knew was that my brother had never failed me before. So I took a deep breath. I wiped my face, and I walked back inside, carrying a decision that would change everything. Not with anger, but with truth. The music began, soft and familiar. As I stood at the back of the aisle, people turned in their seats. Smiles waited for me. No one knew what had just happened behind those closed doors. I walked forward slowly. Each step felt heavy, but my back stayed straight. I kept my eyes ahead, not because I was brave, but because I didn't trust myself to look anywhere else. Mark stood at the altar, his eyes filled with tears when he saw me. If I had seen that look hours earlier, it would have broken me. Now it felt distant, like watching a stranger act out a role. Emily sat in the front row. Her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't look at me. Not once. The ceremony moved forward. Words about love and commitment floated through the air. I repeated them clearly, even though they no longer belonged to me. When it was over, applause filled the room. People hugged us, congratulated us. I smiled because it was easier than explaining pain. At the reception, glasses clinked and music played. Laughter rose and fell around me like waves. I felt as though I was standing still while the world moved on. Then Daniel stood up. He lifted his glass gently. The room quieted, expecting a warm speech from a proud brother. His voice was calm, too calm. He spoke about family, about trust, about promises that should never be broken. Then he told the truth, not with anger, not with insults, just facts, laid out one by one, like stones placed carefully on the ground. The room went silent. Emily's face drained of color. She stood up suddenly and walked out, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. Mark couldn't move. He stared at the table, his hands shaking. Daniel finished with one sentence. "Some betrayals don't need revenge," he said. "They need the light." And in that moment, everything they had hidden was finally seen. The room stayed silent long after Daniel sat down. No music played, no one spoke. It felt like time had slowed, as if everyone needed a moment to understand what they had just heard. I remained seated, my hands rested calmly on my lap. Inside, I felt hollow but also strangely steady. The truth was out now, and it no longer belonged only to me. Mark finally stood up. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were no words left that could soften what had been revealed. He looked around the room, searching for sympathy, but found none. People began to leave quietly. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave me soft looks filled with concern and sadness. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. I walked outside into the cool air. The rain had stopped. Everything smelled clean, like the world had washed itself. Daniel followed me. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not for what he did, but for what I had lost." I shook my head. "You gave me back my truth," I said. "That matters more." Later that night, I took off my wedding dress alone. I folded it carefully and placed it back in its box. There was no anger in me as I did it, only acceptance. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The marriage was ended before it ever truly began. Quietly, cleanly. Emily didn't reach out. Neither did Mark. Their silence felt fitting. I didn't feel the need to chase answers or apologies. They would have only been words, and words had already failed. What stayed with me most was not the betrayal. It was the calm strength of choosing not to break apart in front of those who hurt me. That was my revenge. Not loud, not cruel, just clear. And for the first time since the wedding day began, I felt free. The days after the wedding passed slowly, not heavy, but quiet. The kind of quiet that gives you space to think, even when you don't want to. I stayed with Daniel for a while. We didn't talk much about what happened. We didn't need to. Our silence was filled with understanding. Emily moved out within a week. I heard she packed in the middle of the night. No goodbyes, no explanations, just absence. Daniel filed for divorce soon after. He never asked me if he should. He already knew the answer. Some choices don't need discussion. As for Mark, he tried to call once. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number, not out of anger but because I didn't need his voice to heal. I decided to leave town, not to escape, but to begin again. Every street there held a memory I wasn't ready to carry. I found a small apartment in a quiet city. Nothing fancy, just light, clean space and peace. Healing did not arrive all at once. Some mornings I woke up feeling strong. Other days grief sat beside me like an old friend. I learned to let it be there without fighting it. I started writing again, journals filled with thoughts I had never said out loud. Page by page I found myself returning. What surprised me most was the lack of bitterness. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't replay scenes in my head. They had shown me who they were, and I had listened. That was enough. Slowly my life grew quiet in a good way. I laughed again. I trusted myself again. And I understood something important. Closure doesn't always come from apologies. Sometimes it comes from walking away with your dignity intact. Time has a gentle way of softening sharp edges. Months passed, then years, and the pain no longer lived at the front of my thoughts. It became something I could look at without falling apart. I learned that trust is not something you give all at once. It is something you offer slowly, carefully, starting with yourself. I stopped blaming my younger self for believing in love. She was not foolish. She was hopeful. I also learned that revenge does not have to be loud to be powerful. It does not need shouting or destruction. Sometimes the strongest response is dignity and truth. I never spoke to Emily again. I never heard from Mark. Their lives continued somewhere far from mine, and that was exactly where they belonged. As for my brother, our bond grew stronger, not because of what happened, but because of how we faced it. He stood beside me without needing applause or praise. That kind of loyalty is rare. Today, my life is peaceful, not perfect, but honest. I wake up without fear in my chest. I open doors without wondering what waits behind them. I choose calm over chaos. If there is one lesson this story left me with, it is this: silence can be strength. Truth, when spoken calmly, can change Eve. Writhing and walking away with grace is sometimes the most satisfying revenge of all. Thank you for listening to my story.